The office had already begun to empty by the time I looked up from my screen. Desks were deserted, chairs pushed back in slight disarray, jackets already taken. The soft thud of elevator doors closing echoed faintly down the hallway. The air had changed, less tense, looser, the hum of machines and conversations replaced by the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the low buzz of a forgotten desk fan. I stayed behind, not because I had to, but because I wasn't in a rush to return to a house that felt more like a hallway than a home. My inbox blinked with unread messages, but I stared through the screen more than at it, thoughts drifting somewhere far beyond formulas and deadlines.
She appeared without warning, her presence settling beside me with the easy quiet of someone who didn't need to make noise to be noticed. I didn't turn my head immediately. I felt her presence more than I saw it, the way one feels heat before flame. She sat beside me, the subtle shuffle of her chair brushing the edge of mine. It was late, far past the hour when she should have gone home, but she stayed. She offered to help, and I didn't refuse, though I could have. I told myself it was practical. She was efficient, smart, attentive, but there was something else too, something I didn't want to name. The way she leaned over the desk to glance at my monitor, the way her hair slipped forward over her shoulder, brushing the sleeve of my blouse, the soft scent of something sweet and understated that followed when she moved past me. I focused on the spreadsheets, on the reports, on the problem that needed solving, but I was too aware of the distance shrinking between us. Our arms would brush when we reached for the same pen. Our knees would graze beneath the desk. These weren't accidents, but they weren't deliberate either. They just happened, and neither of us pulled away. We worked like that for what felt like hours, though time moved differently in that silence. At some point, the lights overhead shifted to night mode, dimming just enough to cast the room in a softer glow. She laughed once at something small, and the sound lingered longer than it should have in the space between us. It surprised me, the warmth it stirred in my chest. I hadn't heard a laugh like that in a long time, not directed at me, not near me, not without effort. When we finally closed our laptops, the silence felt heavier. The end of the task left something unfinished, not in the work, but in the air. The thought of returning home to silence and routine felt cold. So I suggested we have a glass of wine, just a small gesture, a thank you, something casual. She looked at me for a moment that felt a little too long. Then she nodded, and that was all it took. We left the building together. The night was cooler than I expected, and as we walked to our cars, I found myself stealing glances at her face in the lamplight. There was something about the way she carried herself, grounded, calm, but quietly electric. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I knew I didn't want the night to end at the parking lot. At my apartment, she slipped out of her heels like it was natural, like she'd done it 100 times. The space felt different with her in it, warmer, lived in. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one, our fingers brushing lightly around the stem. We moved to the couch. The TV remained off. The windows were open. The quiet hum of the city rose in faint murmurs through the glass. We talked at first, or maybe we didn't talk much at all. It's hard to remember. What I do remember is how her body turned slightly toward mine, how her knee touched mine and didn't move, how I didn't pull away, how the laughter from earlier still echoed somewhere inside me, reminding me that I could still feel something, that maybe something in me hadn't completely gone quiet. I didn't plan any of it. I wasn't thinking ahead. I wasn't thinking at all. But I remember the moment her gaze lingered on my mouth. I remember the ache it left in the space just beneath my ribs. And I remember the way my hand drifted toward hers, hesitant at first, as if reaching through a memory, not reality. Nothing happened then, not yet, but everything began.
And once it began, I knew nothing could ever go back to the way it had been. The wine was nearly gone. The bottle sat on the coffee table, tilted slightly in its empty weight, and our glasses rested forgotten on the floor near our feet. The room felt warmer now, though the windows were open, and the night air slipped in gently, brushing along my arms. She sat close beside me, her thigh touching mine with quiet certainty. We weren't talking anymore. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It pulsed, slow and heavy, full of something neither of us had the courage to name out loud. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing more firmly against mine. I felt it through the thin fabric of my pants, the warmth of her skin bleeding into me like ink on paper. My fingers curled around the edge of the cushion, as if gripping something invisible, and then I let go. Slowly, deliberately, I moved my hand onto the space between us. Her hand was already there, resting on her thigh, and when my fingertips grazed hers, she didn't pull away. I didn't either. The light from the lamp cast a soft gold along the line of her jaw. Her eyes flicked toward mine and held there, steady and unreadable, but not cold. There was something trembling underneath, something mirrored in the tightness of my chest. I didn't move right away. I just watched her, the way her lips parted slightly, the way she exhaled without sound. My hand moved again, this time settling on her thigh, just above the knee. I felt the muscle tighten beneath my palm. I waited. She didn't flinch. Her skin was smooth under my touch, her body warm and still. I began to trace small circles with my thumb, watching the way her breath caught at the base of her throat. Then her hand moved, slow, unhurried, and landed on top of mine. She guided my fingers higher, inch by inch, her touch both gentle and certain. My heart thundered in my ears, loud enough to drown out every other thought. She turned toward me fully, her body angling closer, and I did the same. When our faces were only inches apart, she paused. I didn't. I leaned in, and our mouths met in a kiss that didn't ask for permission. It was soft at first, cautious, a testing of waters, but that hesitance crumbled quickly. Her lips pressed into mine with a hunger that matched my own. Our mouths opened, deepened, searched. I felt her hand slip beneath the hem of my shirt, her fingertips grazing bare skin. My breath hitched, but I didn't stop her. I couldn't. We moved together like we'd done it 1,000 times in dreams we hadn't admitted to ourselves. Her body slid into mine as if there had never been space between us. I reached for her, pulling her closer, hands roaming along her back, over her hips, feeling the soft curve of her waist beneath her blouse. I tugged it upward, baring skin I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. She raised her arms without a word, and I peeled the fabric over her head, tossing it aside. I took her in slowly, reverently, eyes lingering over every detail. The line of her collarbone, the gentle swell of her breasts beneath the lace of her bra, the flush that was already blooming across her chest. I bent forward, pressing kisses along her neck, her shoulder, her chest. Her hands were at my waist now, pulling my shirt upward. I let her undress me, piece by piece, until we were skin to skin, breath to breath. Her hands explored with growing confidence, sliding over the curves of my body like she was learning a language we'd both forgotten. I trembled beneath her touch, not from fear, but from the overwhelming clarity of want. When she guided me back against the cushions and climbed onto my lap, straddling me, I let my head fall back, eyes fluttering shut, body arching into hers. Her mouth returned to mine, then moved lower, leaving a trail of heat down my throat, across my chest, until I felt her lips wrap around one aching point of need.
I gasped, my fingers tangling in her hair, hips rising of their own accord. She was everywhere, above me, around me, inside me. When she pushed her hand between my thighs and found me, I bucked helplessly beneath her. Every stroke was deliberate, every breath an invocation. My name left her lips once, whispered like a secret against my skin. I shattered, with her hand still inside me, her mouth at my ear, her body wrapped around mine. The release was quiet but consuming, tearing through me in waves. And when I opened my eyes, her face was inches from mine again, and she was smiling, not smug, not triumphant, but soft, like a confession passed in silence. I reached up and pulled her down to me. My mouth found hers again, slower this time. We weren't in a rush. The night stretched before us, wide and waiting, and I was ready to forget the world outside that room. The room had fallen into a hush so complete that even the distant city sound seemed to pause, as if the world outside held its breath with us. The air was thick with warmth, of bodies, of breath, of something heavier that clung to my skin like mist. The couch beneath us had become a landscape of tangled limbs and rumpled fabric, a quiet altar to everything we had just allowed to happen. But it wasn't over. It hadn't even really begun. She was still above me, straddling my waist, her thighs pressing into mine, her palms resting flat against my stomach. Her hair fell around her face, casting shadows that danced with every shift of her body. Her skin glowed faintly in the low light, kissed with sweat, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that mirrored my own. I looked up at her and felt a pull so intense it almost frightened me. Not just physical, not just desire, but something deeper, something raw. I sat up slowly, my hands gliding along her back, feeling every vertebra, every breath. She leaned into me as I moved, our bodies aligning with quiet familiarity, as if we had always known this shape, this closeness. I kissed her collarbone, then lower, my lips brushing the skin just above her heart. She trembled slightly beneath my mouth, and I held her tighter. There was no rush. Time had slowed into syrup, thick and golden, and we existed somewhere in the space between seconds. We slipped off the last remnants of clothing with slow, deliberate care, our fingers clumsy only because we couldn't stop touching, couldn't stop pausing to feel. When she pressed me down onto the cushions again, I opened my legs without thought, welcoming her weight, her warmth, her breath falling hot against my neck. She moved against me with a quiet grace, hips rocking gently, mouth returning to mine in slow, drugged kisses that tasted of wine and heat. Her hands explored me again, but this time without hesitation. They moved lower, cupping, sliding, parting, until her fingers found me wet and ready, my body already anticipating her without a single word. She slipped inside me slowly, a single, perfect invasion that made me gasp and arch and clutch at her shoulders. Her rhythm was tender at first. The soft thrust of her fingers matched to the movement of her mouth at my throat, my jaw, my lips. I met each motion with a need that felt ancient, like a truth rediscovered. I clung to her as wave after wave built inside me, pressure growing with each deliberate motion, each roll of her wrist, each kiss that melted into the next. My back arched, breath catching, thighs trembling around her waist. She murmured wordless sounds into my skin, not language, just presence. When I came, it wasn't with noise, but with stillness. My whole body froze for a moment, tightened, then broke open in silence as her fingers never left me, guiding me through the unraveling. She didn't move right away. She held me there, kissed my temple, brushed strands of hair from my face. I didn't know how long we stayed like that, our bodies draped over one another, the only movement the slow climb and fall of our breathing. When she finally shifted, I pulled her back to me, rolled her gently onto her back, and knelt between her legs. I touched her, the way I had always imagined, but never dared, fingertips along the insides of her thighs, lips trailing from her navel downward, tongue sliding across soft, trembling skin. She opened to me without resistance, her breath turning into whimpers, her hands clutching at the cushions. I licked her slowly, reverently, learning the taste of her like scripture. Her body responded with desperate rhythm, hips rising to meet me, thighs tightening around my shoulders. I held her steady as she came apart, her cry muffled by the pillow she turned into, her entire body shuddering beneath my mouth. We collapsed together on the rug beside the couch, too spent to climb into bed, limbs tangled, cheeks flushed. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I stroked lazy patterns along the bare curve of her back. There was no sound but our breathing, no light but the soft flicker of the candle still burning on the table. I kissed her forehead. She curled into me. Time forgot us, and the night stretched on like an endless horizon. Morning arrived without warning, not with light or sound, but with the subtle shift of warmth against my skin as she stirred beside me. The room was still wrapped in shadows, soft and quiet, the only illumination a faint gray glow creeping along the edges of the curtains. My body felt heavy, boneless, the way it only does after a night that had unraveled everything I thought I knew. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, letting the silence stretch, feeling the echo of her touch like fingerprints on every inch of me. Her leg was thrown loosely over mine, the curve of her hip pressed to my side, her breath warm against the hollow of my neck. Every place where our skin touched sparked a memory, her mouth trailing down my stomach, her fingers drawing circles along my inner thigh, the low sound she made when I whispered her name against her skin. These moments hadn't faded with sleep. They had rooted themselves into my muscles, into the space beneath my ribs, into the places that had long gone quiet. I turned my head and watched her for a moment. The slope of her shoulder, the rise and fall of her back, the way her lips parted ever so slightly in rest. I let my hand drift along her spine, fingertips tracing the line with almost no pressure, barely grazing. She didn't wake, but her body responded instinctively, curling closer, chest pressing to mine. I could feel her heartbeat, steady, low, like an answer to my own. I let my palm slide downward, across the curve of her waist, over the soft dip of her hip, until it rested just beneath the swell of her thigh. Her skin was still warm from sleep, smooth and impossibly soft. I leaned forward and kissed the side of her neck, the taste of her still familiar, still lingering. As I pressed closer, her body shifted, and I felt her arch gently into me, not fully awake but aware, her hips tilting an invitation, silent and unspoken. I moved slowly, every motion deliberate, as though we were writing something sacred with our bodies. My hands slipped between her thighs, finding her already wet, already open, as if her body remembered mine the way mine remembered hers. I touched her carefully at first, watching her face, reading the way her lips parted further, how her breathing deepened. She moaned softly, and the sound ran through me like electricity. I circled my fingers around her, teasing, exploring, until her back arched and her hand reached for mine, not to stop, but to hold, to anchor herself to the moment. I kissed her shoulder, then lower, my mouth gliding along her side, tongue flicking lightly against her skin.
I moved down her body, leaving a trail of heat in my wake until I knelt between her legs again, nudging them apart with hands that trembled slightly with need. Her thighs opened for me, unguarded, and I lowered my mouth to her, tasting her deeply, letting my tongue move in slow, deliberate strokes that made her gasp and clutch at the sheets. She writhed beneath me, hips rising, one hand tangled in my hair, the other pressed flat to her chest. Her release came like a storm, sudden and overwhelming. I felt it in the way her thighs locked around my shoulders, the way her body pulsed beneath my tongue, the way her breath broke into uneven shudders. I held her through it, mouth steady, hands gripping her hips as she fell apart. When she finally stilled, I kissed her inner thigh, then her stomach, then the curve just beneath her ribs as I climbed back up her body. She pulled me close, her hands running down my back, her lips brushing against my collarbone. I felt her mouth trail lower, kisses turning to nips, her breath hot against my skin. Her fingers found the edge of my panties and slipped beneath without hesitation, and I gasped as she slid inside me, deep and slow, curling her fingers just right. My body responded instantly, hips rising, hands gripping her arms, head tipping back as the pleasure built fast and sharp. Her pace never faltered. Her mouth moved against my chest, her free hand squeezing my thigh as her fingers worked inside me with that perfect, unrelenting rhythm. My orgasm hit hard, sudden, bursting from deep within me and stealing the air from my lungs. I clung to her, every muscle drawn tight, the room spinning and dissolving around me. She held me close, pressing kisses along my jaw, whispering nothing into my skin. We lay tangled in silence afterward, bodies sticky, hearts still racing, skin cooling beneath the weight of morning. I could feel her everywhere, between my legs, in my chest, in the trembling of my fingertips. My body had memorized her, and no matter what came next, it wouldn't forget. The hours blurred. Morning melted into midday without our noticing. The apartment was still cloaked in a kind of softness, as though everything had been muffled by what happened between us. The walls no longer felt like boundaries, but extensions of something warmer, more fluid. We moved slowly, limbs brushing, hands lingering, bodies humming with leftover echoes from the night. There was no awkwardness, no urgency, just the steady rhythm of shared breath and quiet touches that said more than words could ever manage. We didn't dress right away. We drifted from the bed to the kitchen with the sheets still wrapped around our bodies, loose and unhurried. I watched her make coffee, her back bare beneath the fall of my oversized shirt. The way she moved, the way she hummed under her breath, the way her fingers traced patterns on the countertop as she waited for the pot to fill, it all felt unbearably intimate. I leaned against the doorframe, wrapped in my robe, still feeling the soreness between my legs, the lingering flush across my chest, the warmth of her breath on my skin. She handed me a mug, and our fingers brushed again, a touch so small it should have meant nothing, but it didn't. Her eyes lifted to mine and held there, quiet and knowing, and I felt the air shift again, thickening with memory. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Her gaze dropped to the faint mark along my collarbone, a trace of her mouth from the hours before, and I saw her smile, not with amusement, but with something gentler, something reverent. Her gaze dropped to the faint mark from the hours before, and I saw her smile, not with amusement, but with something gentler, something reverent. The day passed in fragments. Dishes stacked in the sink, music playing low from the speaker in the corner, our bodies weaving around each other as if choreography had replaced conversation.
I would pass behind her and let my fingers trail along her waist. She would brush her lips along the curve of my neck as she moved past. There was no need to define what was happening. The line we had once held so carefully between us no longer existed. Whatever had separated us, age, roles, expectations, had been erased, rewritten in touches and looks, and the way our bodies had learned each other without instruction. In the afternoon, we found ourselves back on the couch, not out of laziness, but out of gravity. Her legs draped over mine, her head resting in my lap, fingers tracing idle paths along my thigh. I leaned back, one hand stroking her hair, the other resting on the bare skin just beneath her shirt. The room was quiet, except for the occasional hum of traffic below, a dog barking distantly, the soft creak of the building settling into itself. But inside, everything was alive. Her hand slid slowly up my thigh, fingers parting the robe without force, without question. I let her. I opened to her. Her touch was feather-light at first, teasing, then deeper, more certain. My body responded with a swiftness that surprised me. I felt the heat return, building, pulsing low in my belly. She shifted to her knees, pushed the rope from my shoulders, and knelt between my legs on the rug, eyes never leaving mine. There was a moment, a stillness, a pause, and then her mouth was on me. I tipped my head back and closed my eyes, breath shuddering out of me as her tongue found its rhythm. She held my hips with both hands, firm and grounding, and devoured me with a hunger that was somehow both urgent and reverent. My hands gripped the couch cushions, legs trembling, voice breaking apart into breathless gasps. I came with a cry muffled by my own palm, overwhelmed by how easily she unraveled me again. She stayed between my thighs long after the tremors faded, her face pressed against my skin like a vow. When I finally pulled her up to me, I kissed her deeply, tasting myself on her lips, feeling her melt into my arms. I laid her back onto the couch, kissed her slowly, deliberately, undressed her with hands that shook, not from fear, but from reverence. Her body unfolded beneath me like something sacred. I mapped her all over again, with tongue and lips and fingers, watched her eyes flutter closed as I found the rhythm she needed, felt her pulse beneath my hand, quick and desperate. Her cries were softer now, more tender, like she was giving me something instead of losing it. We lay there afterward, tangled and quiet, the late afternoon light casting golden patterns across our bare skin. My fingers traced shapes along her ribs, her arm draped across my stomach, our legs still interlocked. We didn't speak. There was no need to narrate what had already been written across our bodies. Something had changed, permanently, irreversibly, and yet everything still felt like it belonged. There were no more walls, no more roles to maintain, no more questions to avoid. There was only us, our skin, our silence, and the memory of how easily the line between us had dissolved. The apartment was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. It was the kind of silence that held weight, like it had settled over the space intentionally, pressing gently into the corners, wrapping itself around us like a second skin. Light streamed in through the windows, filtered and soft, casting long lines across the floorboards, across the blankets still tangled at the foot of the bed, across her bare back as she stood by the window with a mug in her hands. I watched her from where I lay, half covered, warm, still sore in the places where she had touched me over and over. Her movements were unhurried, the way people move when they feel safe. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, no awkwardness in the air. Everything felt still and known. She turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her profile, the line of her neck, the way her hair fell loose and messy against her shoulders.
There was a red mark along her collarbone where my mouth had lingered. The sight of it sent a quiet ache through me, not of regret, but of something tender and overwhelming, something permanent. I closed my eyes and let the silence expand, folding over my thoughts, filling the spaces that used to be crowded with doubt. The sheets beneath me smelled like her. The pillow still held the heat from her body. My legs were bare, my skin soft with the residue of sleep and sweat and everything we had shared the night before, and again in the early hours. I shifted, slowly, feeling the dull throb between my thighs, the quiet aftershock of pleasure that had buried itself into the deepest parts of me. My fingers traced a line along my stomach, then up to my chest, where her hand had rested as she slept. The imprint was gone, but the feeling wasn't. She moved toward the bed without speaking, setting her mug down on the nightstand before slipping beneath the sheets again. Her body curled instinctively around mine, her legs fitting against the backs of my knees, her arm draping across my waist. I let her hold me. I let myself be held. Her fingers moved lazily along my skin, tracing meaningless patterns that felt like words I didn't need to hear. I pressed my cheek to the pillow, eyes open, staring at nothing, just letting the warmth of her presence settle everything inside me. Time didn't exist in those moments. The world outside had dimmed, and all that remained was the weight of her breath against the back of my neck, the occasional shift of her fingers, the way our bodies molded together without thought. The silence wasn't avoidance, it was understanding. It was a mutual agreement that what we had done, what we had become, didn't need to be explained or defined. Later, we moved through the apartment like we always had. Coffee, quiet footsteps, the sound of water running, clothes being pulled on without urgency. But there was something different beneath the surface. The way she looked at me across the room. The way her hand brushed mine when she passed by. The way I leaned into it instead of pretending I hadn't noticed. We didn't speak about what would come next. We didn't need to. Whatever this was, whatever we had crossed into, it had already woven itself into the fabric of our days. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her from across the room, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. My body remembered her, my skin ached for her, but it was more than that now. It was the way she moved through my space as if it had always been hers. The way I found her hoodie draped over the back of my chair. The way she left her phone charging in my room without thinking. The way I found myself waiting for the sound of her footsteps, the scent of her hair, the touch of her fingers along my shoulder when she walked past. When the quiet finally broke, it wasn't with words. It was with the clink of a spoon against porcelain, the sigh she let out as she sat down beside me, the way her foot reached out to rest lightly against mine beneath the table. We sat like that for a long time, our legs touching, coffee cooling beside us, silence stretching on like a thread that connected us in ways I no longer wanted to untangle. Nothing about it felt uncertain anymore. Nothing about it felt fragile. She looked at me. I looked back, and in that gaze there was no need for explanation, no need to rewind or undo. The silence between us had become something living, something whole, and I let it stay.